The morning mist clung to the rolling hills of Millbrook County, Tennessee, as Detective Sarah Martinez pulled her cruiser up to the weathered farmhouse that had sat empty for over 2 decades. The call had come in just after dawn. Construction workers renovating the old Henderson property had discovered something that would reopen one of the county's most haunting cold cases. As Sarah stepped out into the crisp October air, the crunch of fallen leaves beneath her boots seemed to echo the footsteps of ghosts from 1999. Inside the house, beneath a loose floorboard in what was once the master bedroom, workers had found a sealed cedar chest. When they pried it open, the contents took their breath away. 2 pristine wedding dresses, still wrapped in their original garment bags, along with matching veils, shoes, and a handful of photographs that would send shockwaves through the small community. Before we continue with this incredible story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything to us as we bring you these unforgettable true stories. The photographs showed 2 radiant young women, Rebecca Lynn Morrison, 23, and Jennifer Ann Walsh, 25, both glowing with the anticipation that only brides-to-be possess. They had been best friends since childhood, inseparable through high school in the small town of Cedar Ridge, Tennessee, about 40 miles from where the chest was discovered. In the spring of 1999, they had made a pact that would ultimately seal their fate. They would have a double wedding and honeymoon together with their fiancés, creating memories that were meant to last a lifetime. Rebecca, a kindergarten teacher with honey blonde hair and an infectious laugh, was engaged to Marcus Thompson, a local mechanic who had proposed on Valentine's Day beneath the old oak tree where they'd shared their first kiss in high school. Jennifer, a nurse at Cedar Ridge General Hospital, was set to marry David Chen, a software engineer who had moved to town 2 years earlier and swept her off her feet with his quiet intelligence and gentle humor. The 4 had become inseparable, spending weekends camping in the Smoky Mountains and planning their shared future. The wedding was scheduled for June 12, 1999, at the historic Millbrook Chapel, followed by a joint honeymoon road trip through the American Southwest. Both couples had saved for months to make their dream trip a reality, planning to visit the Grand Canyon, Monument Valley, and end in California before returning home to start their new lives together. But on June 8th, just 4 days before their wedding, Rebecca and Jennifer vanished without a trace while on what was supposed to be a simple shopping trip to Nashville to pick up last-minute wedding supplies. The last confirmed sighting of the young women was at 2:30 p.m. at Bridget's Bridal Boutique in downtown Nashville, where they had gone to collect Rebecca's altered veil. The boutique owner, Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, remembered them clearly because of their infectious excitement and the way they kept giggling over shared wedding planning secrets. Security footage from the parking garage showed them leaving the boutique at 2:47 p.m., Rebecca carrying a small white bag and Jennifer checking something on her phone. They walked toward Jennifer's silver Honda Accord, laughing about something, completely unaware that those would be their final moments captured on camera. When the women failed to return home by dinner time, both Marcus and David initially assumed they had decided to extend their shopping trip, perhaps stopping for an early celebration dinner in the city. Jennifer had mentioned wanting to try a new restaurant she'd read about in Nashville Scene magazine. But as the hours stretched into night and their phones went straight to voicemail, worry began to gnaw at their fiancés. By midnight, when there was still no word, Marcus called the police. The initial investigation was swift and thorough. Jennifer's Honda was found 3 days later in a remote rest area along Highway 96, about 30 miles southeast of Nashville, near the small town of Fairview. The car was unlocked, keys still in the ignition, Jennifer's purse on the passenger seat with her wallet, credit cards, and $347 in cash untouched. Rebecca's purse was found in the back seat, similarly undisturbed. The white bag from the bridal boutique was nowhere to be found, and that detail would haunt investigators for years to come. Detective Ray Kowalski, who led the original investigation, interviewed everyone who had contact with the women in the days leading up to their disappearance. Friends and family painted a picture of two young women who were blissfully happy and excited about their upcoming weddings. There were no signs of relationship troubles, financial problems, or personal conflicts that might explain their sudden vanishing. Both women had been looking forward to starting families. Rebecca had already picked out names for her future children, while Jennifer had been researching the best elementary schools in the area. The discovery of their abandoned car raised more questions than answers. Crime scene technicians found no signs of struggle, no blood, no foreign fingerprints beyond those of the women themselves and their fiancés. The car's position suggested it had been carefully parked rather than hastily abandoned. Most puzzling was the fact that both women's cell phones were missing, though their car chargers remained plugged into the cigarette lighter. The phones were never found, and attempts to trace their final calls led nowhere. As weeks turned into months, the case grew cold, despite extensive searches of the surrounding wilderness areas. Volunteers from Cedar Ridge and neighboring towns combed through dense forests, abandoned buildings, and remote farmland. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation issued statewide bulletins, and the case was featured on several national missing persons programs. Tips poured in from across the country, but none led to credible leads. Rebecca and Jennifer had simply vanished, leaving behind devastated families and fiancés who refused to give up hope. Marcus and David maintained their friendship in the aftermath, bonded by their shared loss and desperate need for answers. Neither man ever married, though they both eventually moved away from Cedar Ridge, unable to bear the constant reminders of what might have been. Rebecca's parents, Tom and Linda Morrison, turned their daughter's bedroom into a shrine, keeping her wedding dress hanging in the closet and fresh flowers on her dresser every week for 10 years until Linda's death from cancer in 2009. Jennifer's mother, Patricia Walsh, became an advocate for missing persons, working with local law enforcement to improve response protocols and support systems for families facing similar tragedies. The case file grew thick with interviews, evidence reports, and investigative dead ends. Detective Kowalski pursued every possible angle. Were the women abducted by strangers? Had they encountered someone they knew who wished them harm? Or had they voluntarily disappeared to start new lives elsewhere? The lack of any demand for ransom, any sighting of the women, or any use of their credit cards or social security numbers seemed to rule out most conventional explanations. It was as if Rebecca Morrison and Jennifer Walsh had simply stepped out of existence on that sunny June afternoon in Nashville. Over the years, the case was periodically reopened when new detectives took over or when advances in forensic technology offered fresh possibilities. DNA evidence collected from the abandoned Honda was run through national databases as they became available, but no matches were ever found. The case file was digitized, witness statements were re-examined, and cold case investigators applied fresh eyes to evidence that had been pored over countless times before. But Rebecca and Jennifer remained as elusive as ever, their fate a mystery that seemed destined to remain unsolved. The breakthrough came on October 15, 2025, when demolition crews working on the old Henderson farmhouse made their stunning discovery. The sealed cedar chest had been carefully hidden beneath floorboards that appeared untouched for decades. Inside, wrapped in acid-free tissue paper and stored with museum-quality care, were the wedding dresses that Rebecca and Jennifer had never had the chance to wear. Rebecca's dress was a classic A-line design with delicate lace sleeves and pearl buttons down the back. Jennifer's was more contemporary, with a fitted bodice and flowing silk skirt that would have been perfect for her petite frame. Also in the chest were their matching veils, still attached to their original combs, and 2 pairs of satin wedding shoes that had never touched pavement. But perhaps most heartbreaking were the personal items: a pressed flower from Rebecca's engagement bouquet, a love letter from David to Jennifer dated just 2 days before the wedding, and a small notebook in Rebecca's handwriting containing detailed plans for their shared honeymoon, complete with restaurant reservations and hotel confirmations that were never used. The Henderson farmhouse had been owned by Harold and Midge Henderson, an elderly couple who had lived there for over 40 years before Harold's death in 2018 and Midge's subsequent move to a nursing home. The property had sat empty since then, slowly deteriorating until the Henderson children finally decided to sell it to developers. Neither Harold nor Midge had ever been connected to the missing women case, and their names appeared nowhere in the original investigation files. Detective Martinez immediately reopened the case, assembling a task force that included FBI specialists in cold cases and missing persons. The first priority was determining how the wedding dresses had ended up in the Henderson house and whether their presence indicated the location where Rebecca and Jennifer met their fate. Forensic teams descended on the property, using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs to search every inch of the 10-acre lot. Neighbors who had lived in the area for decades were re-interviewed, and the original case files were scrutinized for any overlooked connection to the Henderson property. Margaret Henderson Cole, Harold and Midge's daughter, was devastated by the discovery. She had grown up in that farmhouse and visited regularly until her parents' deaths. "I can't understand how those dresses got there," she told investigators through tears. "My parents were the kindest people you could ever meet. They would have helped those girls if they were in trouble, not hurt them." But as investigators dug deeper into Harold Henderson's background, they discovered details that cast his character in a different light. Harold had worked for the Tennessee Department of Transportation from 1965 until his retirement in 2001, often traveling throughout the state to inspect highway projects and road maintenance sites. His job would have given him intimate knowledge of remote areas and back roads, exactly the kind of information that could be useful to someone who needed to dispose of evidence or hide a crime. More troubling was the discovery that Harold had been questioned but not charged in connection with a sexual assault case in Nashville in 1987, though the charges were dropped when the victim decided not to testify. The investigation into Harold's background revealed a pattern of concerning behavior that had been overlooked or dismissed by those who knew him. Former co-workers described him as charming and helpful, but noted that he had an uncomfortable way of staring at young women and making inappropriate comments that he passed off as jokes. Several women who had worked with him in the DOT offices recalled feeling uneasy around Harold, though none had ever reported him for misconduct. Most significantly, investigators discovered that Harold's work assignments in June 1999 had taken him along Highway 96, the same route where Jennifer's abandoned Honda had been found. His timesheet showed that he had been inspecting road signs and guardrails in that exact area during the week of the disappearance, giving him both opportunity and local knowledge that could explain how he might have encountered the missing women. The more Detective Martinez learned about Harold Henderson, the more convinced she became that he held the key to solving the 26-year-old mystery. But Harold had died 7 years earlier, taking whatever secrets he possessed to his grave. His widow, Midge, was now 89 years old and suffering from advanced dementia in a Nashville nursing home. During a carefully orchestrated interview, Detective Martinez showed Midge photographs of Rebecca and Jennifer, hoping to trigger some memory or recognition. For long minutes, Midge stared at the photos with cloudy eyes, her weathered hands trembling slightly. Then, in a moment of startling clarity, she whispered, "The pretty girls. Harold said they were sleeping in the woods." The comment sent chills through the investigative team. When pressed for more details, Midge became agitated and confused, unable to provide any additional information. But her words suggested that Harold had indeed been involved in the women's disappearance, and that their bodies might be located somewhere on or near the Henderson property. The search of the farmhouse grounds intensified, with specialized equipment brought in to examine every potential burial site. 3 days into the expanded search, cadaver dogs alerted to an area behind the old barn, about 200 yards from the house. Careful excavation revealed disturbed soil and evidence of decomposed organic matter, but after hours of painstaking work, no human remains were found. However, buried about 3 feet down, investigators discovered Rebecca's missing purse and a small white bag from Bridget's bridal boutique, the same bag Rebecca had been carrying when she left the Nashville shop for the last time. The bag contained Rebecca's altered wedding veil, carefully wrapped and preserved, but it also held something else, a folded piece of paper with a handwritten note that would finally begin to unravel the mystery. In Harold's distinctive handwriting were the words, "Forgive me. I never meant for this to happen. They were so beautiful, so happy. I couldn't let them go, but I couldn't keep them either. May God have mercy on their souls and mine." The confession note, while not providing specific details about what happened to Rebecca and Jennifer, confirmed Harold Henderson's involvement in their disappearance. Combined with Midge's fragmented memory about pretty girls sleeping in the woods, it painted a picture of a crime that had haunted Harold for the rest of his life. But questions remained. Where were the women's bodies, and what exactly had transpired on that June afternoon in 1999? Detective Martinez theorized that Harold had encountered the women somewhere along Highway 96, possibly when their car broke down or they stopped to ask for directions. His position with the DOT would have made him appear trustworthy and official. What happened next could only be speculation, but the evidence suggested that Harold had taken the women to his farmhouse, where they were killed and then buried somewhere that had yet to be discovered. The careful preservation of their wedding dresses suggested either remorse on Harold's part or a twisted desire to keep trophies from his victims. The search for Rebecca and Jennifer's remains expanded beyond the Henderson property to include surrounding farmland and wooded areas where Harold would have had access through his work with the DOT. Using historical aerial photographs and Harold's work records, investigators identified several remote locations where he had been assigned projects in the months following the disappearance. Each site became a potential crime scene, methodically searched by teams of investigators and volunteers who had never forgotten the 2 young women who vanished so close to their wedding day. As autumn turned to winter in Tennessee, the search continued despite increasingly harsh weather. The families of Rebecca and Jennifer, now in their 70s and 80s, watched the investigation unfold with a mixture of hope and dread. After 26 years of questions, they finally had confirmation that their daughters had been murdered. But the lack of remains meant they still had no place to properly lay them to rest. Tom Morrison, Rebecca's father, spent his days at the various search sites, unable to bear the thought of his daughter lying alone in the cold ground somewhere. The discovery of the wedding dresses had reopened old wounds throughout Cedar Ridge and the surrounding communities. Many residents remembered the massive search efforts in 1999 and the way the disappearance had shattered the sense of safety in their small town. Churches held prayer vigils for the families, and local businesses displayed missing person flyers that had grown faded and weathered over the decades. The case had become part of the community's collective memory, a reminder of how quickly joy could turn to tragedy. In January 2026, nearly 3 months after the discovery of the wedding dresses, investigators finally made the breakthrough they had been hoping for. Using advanced ground-penetrating radar on a wooded lot adjacent to the Henderson property, they detected what appeared to be 2 anomalous areas of disturbed soil about 50 feet apart, both consistent with grave sites. The property belonged to the state of Tennessee and had been designated as protected wetland, which explained why it had never been developed or thoroughly searched during the original investigation. The excavation of the first site began on a cold February morning, with forensic anthropologists and medical examiners standing by to process whatever might be found. 26 years of rain, snow, and seasonal changes had altered the landscape significantly, but careful excavation revealed unmistakable signs of human remains. The first skeleton was found at a depth of approximately 4 feet, wrapped in what appeared to be a deteriorated tarp or plastic sheeting. Based on the size and bone structure, investigators believed they had found Jennifer Walsh. The second gravesite, located nearby, yielded similar results. The remains appeared to be those of Rebecca Morrison, buried with the same care and at the same depth as her best friend. Both women had been laid to rest side by side, even in death maintaining the bond that had defined their friendship since childhood. The proximity of the graves suggested that Harold Henderson, despite his crimes, had understood the connection between the two young women and had been unable to separate them even after taking their lives. Dental records confirmed the identities of both victims within a week of their discovery. Rebecca Lynn Morrison and Jennifer Ann Walsh had finally come home, 26 years and 8 months after they set out on what should have been a joyful shopping trip to prepare for their wedding day. The news of their discovery brought both relief and renewed grief to their families and the community that had never stopped wondering what happened to the two bright young women who had so much to live for. The funeral services for Rebecca and Jennifer were held on a sunny Saturday in March 2026, exactly the kind of day they would have chosen for their weddings. The ceremonies took place at the same historic Millbrook Chapel where they had planned to exchange vows, with hundreds of mourners gathering to finally say goodbye. Marcus Thompson and David Chen, now both in their 50s, served as pallbearers alongside the women's brothers and male cousins. Neither man had ever married, and both admitted that they had never stopped loving the women they had planned to wed all those years ago. Rebecca was buried in the wedding dress that had been preserved so carefully in Harold Henderson's cedar chest, the delicate lace and pearl buttons looking as beautiful as they had the day she first tried it on. Jennifer wore her contemporary gown, the fitted bodice and flowing silk skirt, perfect for the petite woman who had dreamed of dancing at her reception. Their wedding veils were placed gently over their faces, and each woman held a bouquet of the same flowers they had chosen for their bridal arrangements: white roses and baby's breath for Rebecca, pink peonies and eucalyptus for Jennifer. The services were attended by classmates who had grown up and started families of their own, teachers who remembered the young women as bright and enthusiastic students, and patients who had been touched by Jennifer's compassionate care as a nurse. Rebecca's former students, now adults themselves, shared memories of their beloved kindergarten teacher who had made learning fun and had believed in each of them. The testimonials painted a picture of two lives cut tragically short, but also celebrated the joy and love they had brought to everyone who knew them. As the families finally laid Rebecca and Jennifer to rest, Detective Martinez closed the case file on one of Tennessee's most haunting missing persons mysteries. The investigation had taken nearly 7 months, from the discovery of the wedding dresses to the recovery of the victims' remains. But it had finally provided the answers that had eluded investigators for more than a quarter century. Harold Henderson's guilt was established beyond doubt, though the specific circumstances of how he encountered and killed the two women would remain a mystery he had taken to his grave. The resolution of the case brought changes to law enforcement procedures and victim advocacy programs throughout Tennessee. The persistence required to solve such a cold case highlighted the importance of never giving up on missing persons investigations and the need for continued advances in forensic technology. Rebecca and Jennifer's story became a testament to the power of hope, community support, and the determination of investigators who refused to let victims be forgotten. In the months following the funeral, both families worked to establish memorial scholarships in honor of Rebecca and Jennifer. The Rebecca Morrison Memorial Fund provides assistance to aspiring teachers who demonstrate the same passion for education that Rebecca brought to her kindergarten classroom. The Jennifer Walsh Memorial Scholarship supports nursing students who show exceptional compassion and dedication to patient care. These living memorials ensure that the impact of two remarkable young women continues to touch lives and inspire others to pursue careers dedicated to helping others. The old Henderson farmhouse was demolished as planned, but the developers decided to donate a portion of the land for a memorial garden where Rebecca and Jennifer's remains were discovered. The Jennifer and Rebecca Memorial Garden features two flowering cherry trees planted side by side, surrounded by benches where visitors can sit and remember the two friends whose bond transcended even death. A simple stone marker bears their names and the dates of their births and deaths, along with the inscription, "Best friends forever, united in life and in memory." Today, the white wedding dresses that were preserved for 26 years in a cedar chest serve as evidence in a case that shocked a community and demonstrated the importance of never giving up hope for answers. They remind us that behind every missing person case are real people with dreams, plans, and loved ones who never stop searching for the truth. Rebecca Morrison and Jennifer Walsh may not have had the chance to walk down the aisle on their wedding day, but their story continues to touch hearts and inspire others to never give up on finding justice for those who can no longer speak for themselves. The case of the vanished brides of Millbrook County stands as both a tragedy and a triumph, a reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary facades, but also that truth and justice, though sometimes delayed, will ultimately prevail. In finding Rebecca and Jennifer, investigators not only solved a decades-old mystery, but also provided peace to families who had spent more than half their lives wondering what happened to their beloved daughters. Their story serves as a powerful reminder that every missing person matters and that the search for truth must never end, no matter how much time has passed or how cold the trail may seem.